I'm not just hiring an executive role, I'm building executive team.
Yes.
And on a team, I need to be able to assemble a mix of pieces that help us go achieve our mission.
It's easy to build a company with a fully remote culture or a fully in-office one, but that hybrid where you've got some people one way and some people the other, I think is really hard to lead.
I think this is one area where, like, if I'm gonna micromanage it, this is probably the best place to do it.
How do you use Zapier in your interview process?
I tend to use it pre and post interview to help me research candidates. You're gonna inevitably just get one tiny little piece of the puzzle about this person, and then you're gonna go make a hiring decision on them. And so if there's anything you can do to increase the surface area of knowledge you have over this person to collect more puzzle pieces, you should collect them, because you're gonna make a better decision at the end of the day.
Welcome to How I Hire, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy Mowat, founder of Whispered. Today, I'm joined by Wade Foster, founder and CEO of Zapier. Welcome, Wade. Great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy.
Oh, you bet. I learned early that it's Zapier, like happier, I think, rather than Zapier,
There you
even
go.
though most people make that mistake.
I think I've heard every pronunciation under the sun.
What should we say if we had to say it right?
Zapier makes you happier. That's the trick.
That's perfect. Awesome. Well, Wade is, I'll just kind of do the bio because I love to, I think most people know you, but it's still fun to do it. Zapier is the automation platform that's helped millions of people connect their work and reclaim their time. I have built my last two startups, so Gated and now Whispered, on top of Zapier. It's amazing. It's the platform to connect all the different tools, make it all work behind the scenes. So every time people say, wow, you built this amazing platform, Zapier is behind a lot of those tools. So, Wade, you bootstrapped Zapier along with little rounds here and there, but it's amazing to see you here, have you, and also really you thought about building companies a little differently than other people, including building it remote from the start, which I've really been impressed with. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah, given the remote nature of Zapier, I'm curious, how do you think differently about building out your overall team and then in particular your leadership team?
If the emphasis is on like what's different about a remote leadership team versus, a non-remote leadership team, I don't know that the differences are that big. What I suspect, though, is that the bar for excellence is higher inside of a remote environment. And specifically on a few key dimensions. I think one, your communication skills have to be excellent. If you're not communicating crisply, often, directive, you're probably going to find that people feel out of the loop, they feel confused, and you're not going to get the execution that you want at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that the standard on that dimension is pretty high. I think the second thing is, as a leader, the bar for excellence on your team has to get reset. You're used to maybe competing for talent with folks who are local to you. And so you know what great looks like in your local market, but does that mean you know what great looks like in your global market? And there are, you could maybe argue that like if you're in SF, you probably have seen, great because of the concentration of tech there. But even still, the Bay Area is small compared to globally. And so there is excellence outside those regions. And so it is different to just calibrate on like what is truly great look like for roles you're hiring on. Those are the two that probably come to mind for me on like where there are key differences. I think most everything else is pretty similar. Like you gotta have a vision, you gotta know the skills, you gotta like there's all this other stuff that's like good in an office, good remote, and like you have to be good on those dimensions.
Do you ever see, I think some execs will flourish a little bit more when they can walk around, pat the backs, they can build the relationships. And so it does seem it's a little bit different. Is there anything you're looking for in interviews to try to understand, will people thrive in this type of culture? And then what are some of the traditions Zapier runs to make sure those people are successful in remote?
Well, the point around like some folks can just sort of walk the floor. To me, I call that like management by serendipity. And so, if that's what you're good at, you'll find that remote can be challenging because you have to orchestrate serendipity. You have to find ways to create that inside your company. And that can be tricky in a remote environment because you actually have to be a lot more disciplined and intentional about how you go make stuff happen. Now, there's ways that we try and help these folks when they onboard into the company where, we've been around long enough now where we have a lot of playbooks and documentation that sort of helps coach people on how to get up to speed inside this like weird, quirky environment that is Zapier. We're fortunate in that, we have a small group of EAs that can help onboard people to like some of the rituals. And so they can kind of help with that, serendipity orchestration bits. And, these are folks are, EAs is probably like the wrong title for them. They're like, I would put our EA team against anyone's EAs any day of the week. And so I do think some of those mechanisms can sort of help accelerate the onboarding period, can help them get up to speed quickly. But at the end of the day, you got to stand on your own 2 feet. And in an executive role, like these jobs are here to lead. And if you're having to, be taught on the job, like it kind of defeats the purpose of like going to market to hire somebody. Not that we all don't have something to learn, but there's a certain just like core set of skills that you need to kind of walk in the door ready to go deliver on.
I agree. Were you ever tempted to change the culture of remote? Was there a time, when maybe it was booming in 2020, 2021, or post-COVID or something like that? Or was this just something you put down at the beginning of the company and said, this is important to me?
Yeah, we started building the company this way in 2012. And so like we're pretty committed to this approach to building. And I've never sort of once crossed my mind that we might do it another way. Even if I thought we would, like it's just like not really practical based on how the company is set up at this point in time.
I love it. At Culture Amp, we always said, it's easy to build a company with a fully remote culture or a fully in-office one, but that hybrid where you've got some people one way and some people the other, I think is really hard to lead and also to engage people in that different way. So you're always the company that comes to mind when I think of like truly remote from the beginning, which is amazing. You've hired some great executives over the years. I've got a chance to kind of interact with some of them and meet some of them as well too. How do you go about designing and thinking about like that next executive role when you need it, Wade?
Well, this is an area where I've changed my mind over the years. I think the first experience I had hiring executives is pretty similar to think what a lot of founder CEOs go through, which is, you hire an early team. Your early team is full of like scrappy, figure it out, up and comers, like, sort of, we're gonna run up the mountain, by golly. We'll figure it out any which way you can. And you start to, one of those early people starts managing bits and parts of the team.
Yep.
Whether they have management experience or not, that's kind of not really the point. They know the company, they know the product, they know things. And by nature of that, they sort of are the right person to lead the early stuff. But they may be just lacking a lot of like core leadership skills, management skills, things like that. And for a while, that's kind of okay. But eventually you kind of reach a point and you're like, oh, it actually starts to hold the company back. And so at that point in time, this is my first foray into hiring executives. And it was like, okay, let's just go find like someone who's kind of been there, done that, seen this movie before, and can come help translate it inside of Zapier's environment. And so that was sort of like V1 version. And I think there's just like, you make a lot of mistakes on V1 the first time you're doing it. And it's because you just don't really know what good looks like. You don't understand yourself very well. Like when I reflect back on it, one of the biggest gaps I think is I didn't actually know what kind of CEO I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted out of the executive team. And so I might have hired individually good people, but I didn't know how to like turn it into a team very effectively. And so that kind of ends up holding the company back. There's just tons of canonical advice in here. Like, are you hiring somebody for like the job that you have, or are you hiring because you like their resume? The resume looks nice. They've got good logos on it and stuff like that. I made that mistake. You sort of subconsciously tell yourself you're not making that mistake, but then you kind of look back in hindsight, you're like, I think I maybe fell for it. And so you run into that issue. But I think ultimately what really started to crystallize for me on what it means to hire a great exec team was a couple things. One, I started to realize, okay, I'm not just hiring an executive role, I'm building an executive team.
Yes.
And on a team, I need to be able to assemble a mix of pieces that help us go achieve our mission. And yes, part of assembling a great team is having the functions at the table. So if you're in, a tech company, it's like, yeah, I need engineering represented. I need marketing represented. I need sales So you need these functions represented. But as much as you need those functions represented, you also need other certain behavioral traits at the table. You probably want somebody who is bold and risk-taking. You probably want somebody who is operationally sound. You want somebody who's thinking about, strong communication and storytelling for the company. And, it's rare that like one individual embodies all of these traits.
Yep.
And so you start to realize like, oh, on the team, we need these traits well represented, as much as we need the disciplines represented. And once you do that, you start to think about the assembly of the team a little differently. The next thing I think that also you start to realize is there are characteristics that make people particularly strong inside your company. And that is a learning curve, because there are many successful executives out there who might not do well inside of different contexts. And so you have to assess, okay, well, if they were plopped in my context, is that going to set them up for success, or is that going to set them up for failure? And in order to know that, you actually have to know enough about your own context. And so that means you have to learn what makes your team tick. Like, what does excellence for you look like? And that probably means you have to look in the mirror a little bit and say, okay, well, what makes me tick? What am I good at? But also, like, where do I have weaknesses? Where do I have gaps that I need help? And I firmly believe in the theory of leadership where you want to double down on your strengths. And so it took me a minute to realize, okay, here are the things that I am good at, and I'm going to be unashamed about being good at those things. And also, here are the things that I'm not so good at, and I'm just going to ask for help. Like, hey, team, you should not expect me to be good at these things. You should not expect me to work on being better at these things. Like, I'm going to make sure that it is not holding us back, but we are not going to win because I just learned to get better at these 2 or 3 others. I am bringing you in because you're here to help me cover my backside on these places.
I couldn't agree more. How do you communicate that to people? Like, I've always done the user manual concept of, I know what I am and what I'm not. And I think the sooner and faster you understand that, you will understand, like, do you fit in my world and do I fit with you, or vice versa? But I'm curious, like, I love the idea of like understanding yourself. Like, what was your journey to understanding yourself as a leader? And then how do you embed that in the company, the culture, the hiring?
I mean, I wish I had like some shortcut here, but I think it's a lot of trial and error. At Zapier, we run a lot of engagement surveys, so you get feedback that way.
Yep.
We've done like 360s, like real deep 360s before, and that tells you a lot. At every exec offsite, we do some version of like Pitts and Peach, and Peach is like, here's what you're great at. Pitts is like, here's where you're not. So we're giving each other feedback, and just over the course of a decade doing this, you start to piece together a picture of, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, these are the things I'm good at. Like, people tell me over and over again that these are some things I stand out with. And then there's some things that stand out as things I'm not so good at. And you also start to hear repeated themes in and around that. And, I think the first time you hear it, especially on the negative side, it can be like pretty soul crushing, especially if you thought you might be good at that. And so like, you really do have to like wrestle with that. But over time, I have found, I don't let it get to me as much because I have some incredible strengths and I'm going to go play to those things. And I have a superpower, which is that I can hire an executive team, and that team can help me with these other things that I know I'm not that good at. People have told me over and over again, and like, let's just work on creating an environment where those weaknesses are not magnified, but instead minimized.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's this maturity that we all go through. It's like in our 20s, we're trying to fit more things in a tool belt, try more things, make ourselves good at things. At some point, we reach this point where like, I'm just never going to be good at X, and I'm okay with that. I think we can still learn. So I think it's
well, and it's like, I do think people can get better. Like, I do think that I could improve those weaknesses. Like, if I put a lot of time and effort and energy into it, I do believe I could get better at those things. But when I just look at the company, like, it's going to be way more value for the company if I put all my time and energy putting effort into things I'm already good at. Like, what happens if I put the effort there? We're going to get way better returns than if I tried to just shore up this thing where, my ceiling on those areas, it's just not that high. Whereas my ceiling on these others, like there's a chance I might be world class at these things. And so it's just better to put that investment there.
What's an example of where you hired a senior leader and they well complemented something where you needed them to complement you?
Our CPO, Chief People Officer, Brandon, he and I are someone we've worked together for a long time now. I mean, I have this in a lot of places. He was just the first name that come to mind, but I care a lot about the culture and the people and the teams that we're assembling here at Zapier. And so I generally can think through like, okay, here is how I want a program to work. Here's how I think about the ideal recruiting process. Here's how I think about how compensation and this, that, or the other should work. Whatever the topic is, I have strong opinions on those. I don't want to totally delegate that to a chief people officer. I want to go partner with them. But one thing I know about myself is I also don't necessarily have the time or the energy to go stress test a bunch of these policies internally, roll out the change management, help them land perfectly across all these organizations. I got other stuff to work on. And he's great at that. Like he loves doing that stuff. And so he can take these nuggets of an idea and he can push back, he can riff, we can partner on building the thing. But then I can just trust like he's going to go make this stuff happen without me having to, get into the weeds and ensure that we're executing on every little last element of it perfectly.
I'm fascinated. I always love the drink your own dog food conversation at companies, right? Like I'm imagining when I've seen you write, when I've interacted with some of your team, I'm always impressed at how you're always using Zapier for everything. Like you talk about taking an idea and putting it into a process. I will dive a little deeper into like the interview process either here or in a couple minutes. But I'm curious, like when you have one of these ideas and you put it into practice, like how often does Zapier eat your own dog food, use your own tooling versus like look at external tools to put a process into place?
Yeah, we have a whole Zapier on Zapier like program now internally. In the early days, it was just pretty informal. Like everyone, just kind of did it by default. And that still existed. But I think we found as we got larger, there were areas where Zapier wasn't like well suited for that job.
Yeah.
And the default would be, okay, we're going to go look for something off the shelf. But when we went and looked at those use cases more closely, we realized actually Zapier is not far away from being able to solve that use case as well. And so by putting in place the Zapier on Zapier program, it created as a specific feedback loop where when someone is going to procurement saying, I want to go buy X, the default answer is like, well, have you tried to do it on Zapier? If the answer is no, it's like, well, you need to go back and try. And if the answer is yes, we're like, okay, well, what feedback do you have for like why it was not possible? And then that creates like a nice feedback loop back into the product org where we can say, okay, well, should we go do something about that? And look, there's some things like we would never build into the product. Like we are never going to be payroll processing. So of course, like there's a vendor that, if you're like, hey, I need to go buy a new payroll processor, which we don't really do anymore, but like, of course the answer is like, yes, go get a payroll processor. But there's lots of other like tiny little point solutions here and there that people might look at. And we're like, that's a Zap. Go build a Zap for that. Build an agent for that.
I love the fact that you've been so thoughtful about when you use it and when you don't. To me, the embedding procurement is like that route to, it's like it's the workflow check off of that is so awesome. I remember at Box, I think we tried to build CPQ on Box and it just would never work no matter how hard we tried. And so I think that delayed our CPQ rollout by a couple of years on that side. So that's neat to see. Are there ever things where you're like, no, how do you draw that line? Do they bubble up to you or the product team to figure out like, no, we're not going to build that, or yes, we are going to build that, or do you just encourage people to push the bounds a little bit, or where do you draw?
There's not like a hard and fast rule in place for how this is designed. A lot of it does come back to just a judgment call where, this gets pushed to the product org, the person requesting the software, the product team is kind of just taking a look at it and just having an honest conversation about it. And there are times where it's like, we can do this. We should build this on Zapier. Let's go. And there's other times where it's like, okay, like maybe we could get this for you, but like, we're going to have to, It might be a year. It might be like, now these days it's probably not likely that long, but you just have that honest conversation and it helps, like, okay, yeah, we're going to go buy this versus, build it on our stuff.
I love it. It's well thought through for sure. I think a lot of companies aren't conscious about it, and it ends up like causing weird decisions. Um,
Mhm.
I'm excited to dive into the interview process. Like before we kind of ask some of my questions, I just love to hear like how do you use Zapier in your interview process, Wade?
How do we use Zapier in the interview process? Okay, so we use it um, in a bunch of different areas, but my specific use case, I tend to use it pre and post interview to help me research candidates.
Hmm.
So, in the same way you might do research on like a sales prospect, we try and do that on candidates as well. So, it pulls both from like application, prior interviews, and creates a brief for me, but it also goes and looks at on the internet and pulls things together based on what have they shared on the internet. So I get a like full perspective on who this person is. And so that all gets like assembled for me in an automated way. So when I sort of quote unquote step into the interview, I've got that ready for myself. Then post interview, we have a bunch of automation that's sort of helping uh, write the scorecard at the end of the day.
Hmm.
So you're taking, generally this starts with the transcript.
Yeah.
So there's the interviews recorded, the transcript gets fed through the rubric. The rubric sort of spits out like, here's what the AI saw. And then there's a place for me. I generally try and write my assessment separate from that. And then I go look at what the output of the transcript plus the AI prompt is, and then I add mine to it. And I usually just like to compare and contrast just to see like, hey, you've got this other like entity that's in the call now that you can sort of use as a rubber duck to sort of compare and contrast notes. And I think that's really effective to strengthen my scorecard as well too. And then ultimately, I go in and just submit the scorecard directly to the ATS. And so that's sort of like my personal automation in and around this. Now we also use automation a lot at the initial intake for when we're designing the role. So if we approve a new, like the whole rec approval list runs through a suite of automations that like pings a Slack channel, and I'm not exactly sure all the steps that it takes at this point in time. Someone else built it. But eventually, like myself and our CFO, we approve every rec internally. And so there's a like little Slack bot that pops up and says yes or no to this. And we go click the yes or no button to say we approve it or not. Then once it's approved, there's a bunch of automation that goes and generates the job description, generates the rubric, and then ultimately generates a draft in our CMS for like publishing this to the site as an open job rec. Of course, each step of the way, we're inserting humans in the loop to review a lot of this to say, okay, yes, we do agree that that is the job description. Yes, we do agree that that is the rubric. These are often discussions amongst the hiring manager and the hiring panel to say, yes, this is what we're actually looking for. But every step of the way, there's just like little bits of places you can automate, pieces that will save you. Yeah, I mean, it just like saves you an hour of time here, saves you a couple of days there, saves you a meeting there, and just helps the overall end-to-end process move that much quicker, which I think is really important in hiring. Like, it's a competitive environment, and you want to be able to move quickly, but not sacrifice your diligence. And so automation is like a necessary ingredient I found to be able to do this well.
I love it. It's so well thought through, and there's like approval of rec. You're probably doing a lot of these things a lot faster because you're seeing them. One, I'd love to, before we dive into references, which I think we're going to have a lot of fun on, what do you think about the CEO approving every offer? A lot of CEOs use that as a way to raise the bar, keep the culture high, and do that. I think I also see that slow down a lot of offers. And I'm curious, like your personal philosophy, and then I'm betting you probably have a Zap workflow if you do approve the.
Yeah, so I approve every offer at Zapier. There was a time when I stopped doing that, and I think initially when I stopped doing that, it was fine because a lot of the folks that we're now hiring were kind of trained up under me and sort of knew the Zapier way of hiring. When I felt it slipping, it was when that next group of people started hiring, and that's when I felt like, ooh, like we haven't codified our like talent standards as as well as we need to. And so that's why I inserted myself back into the approval loop and said, hey, I want to go approve every offer that goes out. Now I have a SLA for the team where I say, hey, I will approve in under 24 hours. And personally, I try and improve much faster than that. Because I recognize this. Like, I don't want to be the person that causes us to lose out on a great candidate. So I will be responsive to this at the end of the day. But that mechanism allows me to audit what happened in the recruiting pipeline. And, it might seem, I'm sure there's folks out there that say, hey, this is micromanaging. But I think this is one area where, like, if I'm going to micromanage it, this is probably the best place to do it, because this is literally, you're bringing in the people that are going to build the future of your company.
Yeah.
These are the folks that you're entrusting to go solve the most important problems for you. And if there's one place I'm going to micromanage, that's the one where I'm like, I feel like I got to go do that to ensure that the standards are really high. Now, there's a fine line too that you have to balance, which is you want your team to feel ownership of the process as well at the same time. And if you do this process poorly, what happens is they'll just say, like, Wade, you make the hiring decision. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to make the hiring decision, because in a lot of places, I actually am not well equipped to say yes or no. So what I'm really trying to do is audit, were we thorough in our interviews? Did we ask good questions? Did we probe in the places that we probed, or needed to probe, that kind of stuff? And if those things are present, I will assume the candidate, yes, is a great hire at the end of the day. I'm not trying to look at it and say, oh, I think this person's great by only reading scorecards and, a LinkedIn profile or things like that. The interview is there to go do that. And then I'm auditing the evaluation process on our side.
That is the best spoken version of that thought process that I've ever seen. I thank you for that. It's, I think that fine line is so important, right? Like, I love the concept of licking the cookie. If you lick the cookie on the candidate, like, hey, I'm going to dig a little deeper, all of a sudden people start to back off and let Wade take the cookie and make the decision. But I love why it's there. The other reason I've heard that people do it is what you're basically saying, which is the process needs to work well. I need to know that you've been incredibly thorough in it and that you've written it up and you've asked all the questions we need to ask. And if that's happened, I'm generally going to say yes, unless there's some thing that I don't see there.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that's, like, really important to recognize is, for most hiring managers, they just don't hire that many people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're a frontline manager on a team, you might hire one person a year. And so you just don't have that many reps at this. And so the fact that you're, like, not that good at hiring, that's not your fault. Like, how many of us are good at something that we only do one time a year? Like, not that many of us. Like, if you really want to be great at hiring, you need to do a lot of reps. And so where do you get a lot of reps? Well, it's kind of not until you get into these senior roles where you're doing a lot of hiring, where you start to actually have some, like, real battle scars where you're like, oh, like, I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I would have done that differently. And you can tell the tales of, like, all the mistakes you've made. And so once you get to that place, like, part of being involved in the process to me is, I'm like, I just don't want for that hiring manager who's making one hire a year. I'm just like, gosh, if I could just impart any amount of wisdom on you so you don't have to go through that same thing, I would like to try and do that. So, like, it comes from that perspective.
And what you said at some point was, I haven't yet put into place all the hiring rubric or strategies, but if you can give them that, I think it's valuable. And then you're right. Like, pattern recognition exists in hiring. Like, if you've done it once or twice, you don't know what a good answer or a bad answer is, or what a good reference is, or how to ask those questions.
Totally. And there's little, like, until you've done it enough, there's little, like, just threads that are sort of, like, easy to overlook, but you do enough hiring and you start to realize, like, one of those little, like, tiny little yellow flags that sort of pops up, and that easily earlier in my career to just glossed right over. But now further in, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to pull that thread and I want to see what unravels from it. And so, let's go pull it. Let's go see. And oftentimes that's where you can make or break a candidate, where if you pull that thread, that yellow can turn into a screaming green, or you might go, ooh, yeah, that's not great. But if you don't pull it, you won't know.
That is if you just sit there and read questions off of a list, I'm much more of, I'm going to find that thread and I'm going to go as deep as I possibly can on that thread. But if you don't know which thread to pull, you won't pull it. I like that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of times that I see that where candidates are like, oh, I don't know. It seemed fine to me. And I was like, well, that's why we go pull the thread and find out, like, is it actually fine? Or are you just assuming it's going to be fine? And I find a lot of hiring managers fall into that trap. It's like they want the candidate to be good. They want to make the hire. And so they'll kind of just pull up shy and not look as closely at the warts. Whereas my opinion is like, I want to look at the warts. I want to look at the good stuff. I want to see it all because it exists. And then I want to make an informed decision.
So that leads us right to one of the topics I think we're excited to talk about, which is references. You had that great post around, I think it was 20 references. And I've been spending a lot of time just diving deep into references. I do have a Zap hack for you at the end,
Nice.
which I'll tell you. But I'd love to hear like your philosophy. And I think we're talking about executive references. You don't need 20 on junior people, but I'd love to understand like how your philosophy on references came about, how you think about it. And we'll push in a little bit on this one.
Yeah. So how it came about, I didn't used to think this way. Like I used to be like, references, like they're not that impactful. I then learned, the references I was doing was not that impactful. Like the way I was going about it was not actually leading to me thinking that they were all that valuable. What changed my mind? Yeah, I think, mostly it was just frustration with my own hit rate. Like it's not common for you to go into any sort of like growth stage company and hear the team say, hey, our exec hiring is 50-50. It's a coin flip if we get it right or not. I just looked at that stat and was like, I couldn't say with confidence that like, oh, we are much better than that. And so I was like, well, shoot, like I got to try something. Like, let's see if we can get better. And, I came across some folks who just sort of like raved at doing these deeper references and said, okay, I'm going to go try that approach and see if this actually improves the process quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, like, I think it has. And I do a couple things in my reference process. So first, I want to talk to as many people as I can spend time with. But specifically, I want to talk to multiple managers in the past, multiple peers in the past, multiple direct reports in the past, and ideally get founder CEOs in the mix there as well. And across a wide mix of companies you've been at. And that's important too. Like, I don't want to just get, one slice of life. And I'm fine going back, a decade plus to like collect all these folks, the folks. And so that's kind of the cohort of folks I want to go talk to. Then I want to ask them roughly the same buckets of questions. I want to hear, tell me about when you worked with them. Tell me what you think the highest impact thing that they did was. Tell me where you felt like they could be better. I want you to tell me when I go talk to all these other peoples, tell me who you think what their biggest fans are going to say about them, and tell me what their biggest critics are going to say about them. This is a good one because now you start to get interesting information that you can use in subsequent reference checks. You can say, hey, I heard that, someone said they wouldn't be good at this. Do you agree with that or not? And you can start to have more provocative questions to ask the reference checks to see if they go, oh, I guess that's true. Or like, wait, what? Someone said that about them? That doesn't sound at all like the person I've talked to. So you have these provocative questions that the reference feels obligated to speak to. And especially if it's wrong, they feel obligated to clear it up where they're like, no, that's just not right. You also want to ask this question around, I want you to compare this person to the best person you've ever worked with. The best person's a 10 out of 10. And, I want you to tell me, how they stack up. Are they a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, etc.? And then more importantly, I want to hear what would they have to do differently to be a 10 out of 10? Like what closes the gap? And so that helps you understand what skills they're maybe not as solid at where they're working at. The last thing I want to hear is, I want to hear more about how the company they were at worked. Like, tell me about the culture there. What types of people thrived? What types of people didn't thrive? And that's really useful information as well, too, because now you can start to hold that company up to your own company and say, hey, are we like that environment or are we not like that environment? Mm-hmm. And if they thrived at the company and your company is quite like that, you'll go like, oh, this might be like a match made in heaven. Or if they didn't thrive and the company is exactly like yours, you'd be like, ooh, this might be tough because I think we kind of are that way. And so you just start to build this like richer mosaic of this person across multiple companies, across, a decade plus, and you really can understand them. Well, now I'm only doing this for finalists, right? This is kind of like the last one or two people you're talking to. Then you can go back to that person and say, okay, here's what I heard. Here's the things I thought like people rave about you. Here's the places where you have some growth improvements. Here's how I think that plays at Zapier. Like, I think these things are going to cause you to be excellent in this role. And here's some places where I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think we'd be taking a chance together. Like, this might make or break us if we're good at this. And then I just want to see how they respond to it. Do they take ownership? Do they say, yep, here's what I've learned. Here's how I think that plays out. And just have like a real honest conversation about that. And I encourage everyone to do the same for me, where I'm like, hey, you should go talk to people about me too. Like, I'm not a perfect CEO. And so you should call around and see what you have to hear and bring it back to me. And I'll tell you the honest truth, because I think the reality is for these types of roles, these candidates are going to parachute into your company and they're going to see the good, the bad, the ugly right away. And so I would rather just do all that work before we make the hire or not, and just say like, hey, are we both signed up for each other or not? Like, do you want to come into my beautiful mess and like say, yep, I want that? And do I want to come into your beautiful mess and say, yep, I want that? Or do we look at it and say, you know what? Actually, I think there's a better place for you and a better person for us at the end of the day. That's what this is all about, is just trying to have that like honest conversation versus hoping that it is going to work out. And I think a lot of folks just sort of say, I've been great everywhere, or this person's been great everywhere. Of course they're going to be great for me. But rarely have I seen that work out. There's so like, you go talk to any executive in a tech and you can hear them say there were companies that I just kicked butt at. And there's others where it's like, I just wasn't very good there. Like, you'll hear that time and time again.
I think this also helps people understand. It's a little bit of selling as well too, right? Because my manager, what it's going to get back to you is those 20 that you do, it's going to get back to the candidate. Wade really cares. And he's asking these questions. I always use this statement of, they're in the finalists. I'm just evaluating how they'd be a fit rather than I'm trying to figure out yay or nay. And I think people are a lot more giving of that. And they're like, wow, Wade's pretty excited about you. He's spending a lot of time asking deep questions because he cares about the cultural fit, which is really nice. Okay, so I've got 2 Zap hacks for you that I've learned from other companies, Wade. I'll be curious if you got them. So the first one is every resume from everybody that ever passes through your ATS and gets hired into your company, you put into a database, and then you can look and see, did anybody back channel with that? Did anybody overlap with that person at all, right? So you can even go to the junior person at the company and be like, hey, I heard for, like 2 jobs ago, you overlapped with Bob in this job, would love to get your take. So I heard that on a podcast recently where Purcell's running that, right? So they're basically dumping resumes and using them for overlap. That seems like a totally logical thing just to do.
100%. Great use case.
Yeah. The other one that I heard from folks at Fathom was, ask when you're interviewing the person, like which people would say, how would people talk about you, right? And so you'd say that. And then they would say that, and you're never going to say I was a 10 out of 10 everywhere. So then you can turn around and ask those people. You can use it as prep for your reference calls, where you can effectively say, hey, Bob said, that you would say he is a 7 out of 10 on this. And all of a sudden that gives permission for somebody to start to go like, yeah, he kind of was, like, rather than just say he's always the most awesome or always the best.
You're spot on. And I, on that last one, I do this with candidates too. So like, if you were to interview with me, if you do enough of these reference, you start to kind of know a lot of people. And so, I could say, hey, like, I know this person, this person, this person. When I give them a call, what do you think I'm going to hear from them? And you can also, I would ask you, I'd say, hey, I'm going to go call some people. I set the expectation. I am going to do some references. What do you think I'm going to hear from your biggest fans and your toughest critics? And so I give them a chance to tell me ahead of time, this is what I think you're going to hear. And that's a great test for like their self-awareness as well. Like how like, just do they understand how they come off with others? And, it's a great green flag to me when they can sort of pretty much nail those things and say, yep, here's, they're going to say, I'm great at this, this, and this. And I think you're probably going to hear, I kind of wasn't so good at these things.
I love that. Okay, now I'll ask you another question. How do you figure out who to ask for back channels? Like, I talked to tons of recruiters in the last couple months on this one. They're going to line up, like the LinkedIn's like, who do I know and who's lined up? But do you have anything more technical that you're doing that? We're building the infrastructure right now to basically take in a LinkedIn, use the Swarm and Scale Stack and probably a little bit of Zapier to figure out who should we ask for so we don't miss anybody. But it seems like everyone just kind of lines them up and just looks. But I'm curious how.
Yeah, this is one area where it's pretty manual for me still. So, generally I'm just asking them for like, hey, who should I go talk to? I want to have this bank of people. When I go talk to those folks, I ask them, who else should I be talking to? And usually there will be like a consistent set of names that pop up where it's like, they worked with this person a lot. They will have something to say about them. And so then you go reach out to them and say, hey, what's up with this? And so, you kind of do that enough and you're probably going to find, who was the circle around this person at their job that's going to have the best insights. And that's the most important thing. You don't want to get stuck with a reference who is more like personal references are nice where it's like, oh, I worked with, Bob was great. He was da-da-da, but it's like, what projects did you work with him on? It's like, well, we didn't actually overlap that much on many projects, but I always had a good time with him. And it's like, okay, well, that's nice to hear, but that doesn't really tell me much. Like, I want to talk to the person who is in the trenches with Bob and, has seen Bob at his best and Bob at his worst. And I want to know what that person has to say.
I like that a lot. One thing my favorite answer is I would hire them again. I had one person that literally like 5 people at the same company were like, is this person looking? Can I hire them? And you go scribble that down and do that.
I mean, you would be surprised how rare you come across that person, but it does happen where you'll be talking to someone, they're like, just hire them. Like, why are you asking me more questions? Like this, it's like, I'm happy to answer these questions. Like, I can tell you, but like, you should just hire this person. Like, you sometimes get those where you're like, okay, like, I get it. I still want to know. I still want to know why you're getting after that. But that does happen, but it's rarer than you would think. I think all of us we have some strengths, we have some weaknesses. Is that kind of just the truth of it?
So when you do 20, if you did it on me, you're going to find that person that I just did not mesh with. I guess when you're doing 20, you're getting enough data points, but how do you adjust or calibrate for that bad reference on maybe a good person?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think at the executive level, you're not looking for 100%.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in some ways, like all green is a little fishy too.
Yeah.
And you got to be careful. Like, this is where it's a judgment call. And this is where you really have to understand it well. But, if you are a successful leader, that means you probably are some mix of like demanding and supportive. And that demanding side of the house probably is going to show up in those references. And not everybody's going to love that all the time. You're probably going to have a place where you're like, yeah, I was demanding of this person, but like, it probably didn't land the way I wanted it to. If I could do it again, I'd probably do it a little different. And, mostly what you're trying to hear in those situations is like, I'm not going to shy away from being demanding, but there's an approach I could have taken that was a little different. Like, that's kind of what I'm trying to get a sense for. Because the most common complaint you have is generally like, yeah, they had high standards, high demanding, and like that kind of rubbed the wrong way inside the organization at times. That's the most common one you run up against. Every now and then you get it, you run up against like a super red flag where it was like unethical behavior, like low integrity things. But I find that's generally not that common, which I think speaks to just the quality of the industry we're in.
I agree. I like how all of your different reinforcing loops work together, right? Like you can't do the 20 without also getting the feedback back. You can't do just reportees, but not people that directly reported to you. It's really well thought through. And I'm sure it created a little buzz when you posted it, but I love how deeply thoughtful you are.
Well, yeah. And I think that's where like, it's easy to sort of, I think for people to take one of these tactics and sort of poke holes in it. But I think at the end of the day, the way I think about hiring is, you're going to inevitably just get one tiny little piece of the puzzle about this person. And then you're going to go make a hiring decision on them. And so if there's anything you can do to increase the surface area of knowledge you have over this person to collect more puzzle pieces, you should collect them because you're going to make a better decision at the end of the day. And each one of those puzzle pieces is going to come with some bias and come with some, weird factual inaccuracies, etc. And that's okay because you're going to collect as many as you can. And by having more of them, you're probably going to have a better answer than having less of them. And I think some people would argue, well, this thing is biased or wrong, so I'm not going to look at it. And I take the opposite approach where I'm like, actually, just the more data you have, the better you're going to be, even if like all data is biased in one way or the other. But in aggregate, you're going to sort of try and wash the bias out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One more big question, and then we'll and I got my final closing at the end. AI fluency. I mean, I think you've written a little bit on it. Increasingly, if you are not, everyone should be using ChatGPT at this point. But
Yes.
I'm curious, if you're not doing that, you should just stop with the job market. But I'm curious how you folks evaluate AI fluency in the hires that you do.
We're getting better at this. I think when we first started, it was a little bit of self-reporting. So I'd be like, hey, Andy, tell me what tools are you using? What do you like? What do you don't like? And so you just sort of self-report back to me, and I would just make a judgment call. I'd be like, okay, like that sounds pretty good. Or like, actually sounds like Andy's just barely dabbled around with it. So that's kind of where the first version of this was just, hey, why don't you just tell me and I'll just make an assertion of if I think that's good or not. More recently, we're doing more like skills assessments and trying to bake that into the process. Here, like, I don't know that I've got like any sort of magic bullet for folks, but you kind of do some of the things where you'll say like, hey, I don't know, if I was hiring someone for a marketing job, I might be like, here's an Excel file that's got a bunch of data in it. In an hour, can you come back with like some marketing campaigns to like tell me what you're doing? You can use any tool you want to use. And so you just might go see like, well, how far did they get? Like, do they spend the whole time like just trying to like do Excel stuff? And you're like, well, that's probably not the best way about it versus like, do they upload it to Excel and say like, hey, can you segment the data in one particular way or not and come up with like different audience types I can go after? And then, okay, great. Based on these audience types, do I go to like Lovable or Replit and like try and build some landing pages? Or do I go to, Canva and try and build some ad stuff and just kind of see like how far do they get? How creative do they use? Like what's the breadth of tools they're using at the end of the process? Like again, that's not a silver bullet, but like it helps you just get a feel for like where do they reach for? What's their like natural inclination? And again, it's just about trying to collect more information and better understand like where is this person as it relates to other people we might go consider for this role.
Are there any roles in your company that you would not hire, that you would not care about AI fluency at this point?
No.
Good answer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open-minded that the answer might be yes, but you got to prove it to me. Like I just, my bias is just like so strongly that like, this is the future. So yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know what job that would be.
I agree with you. Well, Wade, I could probably ask you questions for another hour, but our traditional closing question, which is, who was the best hire you ever made and why?
Best hire ever made and why?
By the way, you're the first person ever to get our traditional closing questions. So
I love it. Gosh, there's a lot. Well, I mean, one person that comes to mind is someone who came in the door as like a freelancer, ended up then was like writing content about Zapier, kind of like working on the marketing side, joined us in customer service, quickly like was leading big customer service teams, then started running our platform team. Then by the end was like running all of product. And, it was just someone who just like took extreme ownership, like extremely scrappy, like dove into the data, really tried to understand, what's most impactful for customers, and then showed up every single day to try and go make it better for them. I just don't find that many people with that kind of flexibility to sort of like work across like functional lines, work across all these different areas, and sort of no matter what domain you put them in, they kind of find a way to walk out and be successful. And I think that's just pretty impressive when you find someone like that.
Couldn't agree more. And those people are rare. Well, thank you for the time. If people are building workflows on top of AI and you're not using Zapier, you should be. I'm using them all over the place. Wade's given you a couple good examples, and he's also deeply thoughtful about hiring. So thank you, Wade.
Thanks, Andy.